So now we have Mike Lupiani and Brian Brazillo talking about extract metrics from logs for high performance analysis.
Cool. Thanks, Rishi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I think we're going to raise the volume a little bit. Does that sound good now, Rishi?
Can you guys hear?
You guys hear me all right? Cool. Perfect. All right. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining day 2. Hope you guys enjoyed the keynote. My name is Brian Brazillo. I'm a product manager at Sumo. I'm joined by Mike Lupiani, my colleague, sales engineering manager out east. We're here to tell you a little bit about our new feature we have called Logs to Metrics. And this is all about extracting metrics from your logs for really high performance analytics. If you saw Ramin's keynote yesterday, you probably saw the demo of this. We're going to go into this in more detail. We're going to show you how to get started today. And we're going to tell you a little bit about what are the best use cases for you to start doing this in your environment right now. So by the end, you'll understand what metrics are. For those that attended the metrics session yesterday, a little bit of a repeat, but really important to understand why you're going to get these benefits, the performance, the retention, long-term retention, plus the alerting. Number 2, you're going to learn how to extract these metrics out of your logs without re-instrumenting your whole application. This is a really critical point because if you want to take advantage of metrics today, you don't need to start re-instrumenting your code to spit metrics out natively to Sumo. So this is really nice. And then finally, learn how logs to metrics can be leveraged for business KPIs, customer experience KPIs, things that other people in your organization might care about. As Ramin pointed out, all these different solution areas that we're delivering on at Sumo, logs to metrics is going to be really great for operational analytics. Getting some of those key KPIs out of your logs that tell you about the health of your application, the health of your infrastructure, but by no means is this limited to operational analytics. Your logs contain information about security events, about your customer KPIs, kind of fall in a few of these buckets here. We're going to focus a little bit on operational analytics, but you'll find use cases all over the place here. So just to start out and describe, what are metrics and why is this important when we talk about extracting metrics out of logs? Real simple. Metrics are just numeric samples of data collected over time. And the nice part about this is that there's a very straightforward format. It's a timestamp, it's a value, and then it's a bunch of tags, or also known as dimensions. And these tags uniquely identify the metric that you're tracking. So in this example here, I'm looking at my CPU metric on my travel application in my production environment, and for my host called Checkout 5. This is great. This is really structured. Key value pairs describing a single value. And when it's structured in a way like this, we could pipe it to our new native time series database that's going to be really efficient at storing this type of structured data, allowing you to retrieve it and analyze it in a really high performance fashion. And when you have these metrics in the system, this is going to be a really effective tool for monitoring and troubleshooting. It's going to give you that end-to-end visibility across your application, track these KPIs over a long time period. Most importantly, get proactively notified when something's wrong with your system. Metrics are a constant measurement that's coming into your system. It's like the doctor measuring your heart rate, your blood pressure. You're frequently measuring it. It's the first thing you want to be notified about when something goes wrong. Not only that, though, when you do identify an issue in your system, say your customers are experiencing high latency or an increased number of failures, you're going to need metrics to get a lay of the land and understand, okay, what else is going on in my system that I should be aware about? And metrics are going to help you do that. We love our logs. We'll always love our logs. It's our first thing we went into. We did a little bit of a bake-off here where we extracted metrics out of a set of logs, and Mike will go into this in more detail here. You can see that top chart is a log query that's basically parsing all of the raw log messages. It's aggregating it by over time and trying to count it by source host. And at the bottom there's the same exact data, but in the metrics format. The moment you click, last 24 hours, last 14 days, months, the metrics query is instantaneous, and that's really because of that structured format that we were looking at. You could, of course, always do this type of thing in logs, but as some of you may have experienced, when you have large data sets or you have really long time periods, it's going to slow down a little bit because, again, we're going to have to go through all of those logs and parse it. There are some ways of speeding up those log queries at the top, and actually, in this case, we're actually even backed by a scheduled view, if you're familiar with scheduled views. So even still, you're going to get tremendous performance benefits by converting it to metrics. Another really nice benefit of metrics, because of this structured format, it's pretty cheap to store this data. We're going to give you 13 months retention out of the box for metrics. So if you're doing logs and your retention is 90 days, but you want to track these metrics, say for business purposes, operational planning, you want to look year over year, how did this look, at the same time last year? Metrics can do it. I'm just doing like an 8-month query here, and it runs like that. So it's really cool. And then finally, when we built our metrics alerting, we introduced a new metrics alerting engine. And this is a real-time streaming engine that's going to evaluate these metrics in a rolling window and notify you as soon as something is wrong. Another nice feature of this is our UI for alerting. And you'll notice you have a few different capabilities here to make more flexible and actionable alerts. Different thresholds. I could set a critical threshold, say, when this metric exceeds a certain value for 5 minutes, send me an email notification. Maybe I could also trigger a PagerDuty incident or send a Slack message. With this interface, you could send multiple notifications per threshold. I could send it to 3 different places for a critical threshold. I could specify a separate warning threshold here, and maybe I just want a Slack message, to say, keep an eye on this because something's going wrong. And then finally, the third and really important threshold here is missing data. If you're expecting this data to come into Sumo Logic and for some reason it stops reporting, you probably want to know about it. This is what that threshold's really great for. We'll let you know when we stop seeing that data so you can investigate whether it's an issue on your end, something wrong with the data, and so forth. So again, performance, that really fast, long time range querying, the retention of the 13 months, and then this returning is this alerting is a really nice feature on top of all of that. You're probably wondering, wow, why can't I just turn all of my logs into these metrics? And Michael's going to go into a little bit of detail on which types of logs are good to convert into metrics. Over time, you could probably do some of these metrics natively instead of going to logs. But we're really excited to launch this new feature called Logs to Metrics that's going to help you do this today without worrying about re-instrumenting your code. Mike.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, hello everybody again. My name is Mike Lupiani. I'm the Sales Engineering Manager for Sumo Logic for the East. So I see a few people out there that I've worked with on various accounts. Glad you could make it to our session today. So I'd like to go through a little bit of detail of exactly what we're doing and how we're solving a different problem in a little bit of a different way. So to take a step back, there's really 4 different types of data that we're typically looking at in Sumo Logic. Just to look kind of across the top, system performance data, application performance data, system and security events, as well as application events. So from that perspective, these are different things that ultimately need to be handled in a slightly different way, depending on exactly what you're trying to do with it. Now, obviously as a sales engineer, our default nature is to try to solve the problem with whatever we have available. 2 years ago, our solution to all of these problems was figure out a way to turn it into a log, bring it into Sumo, we'll parse the numbers out of it, and we'll make it go. Obviously, we saw that wasn't the most optimal way to do it, as Brian detailed, from both a retrieval, storage, and ultimately retention perspective. And that ultimately led to some costs for our customers that we wanted to bring down and really give a more optimal format on how we actually bring that data in, again, with all the benefits that Brian described. So as we step through these different types of data, the ideal format for storing each of these is a little different. System performance data, it's a number and a timestamp and some metadata. What was the thing that I was measuring? Ultimately, what was that number that we pulled from it? A CPU percentage, disk, network statistics, whatever that may be, as well as the metadata. Which instance was this? Which environment? Things like that. So that's something that natively should really be collected and stored as a metric. Same thing with application performance. If you're looking for either how frequently a certain thing is occurring, how long it takes to happen within your application, those are all events and objects that at the end of the day, it's a very simple number and really belongs as one of these time series metrics stored in our time series database. Now, when we get down to the system and security events and application events, these are things that are logs. Again, we frequently use the phrase here at Sumo Logic that the metrics and kind of monitoring side of the performance is really the heartbeat monitor of your application and your infrastructure. It tells you when something goes wrong, but it doesn't know what went wrong. Those logs and system events, That's going to be the blood test to really dig in and figure out exactly what happened so that you can lower your time to repair it and obviously get either the system up and running or keep it from ever going down in the first place, depending on how early you were able to catch it. So these are the ideal ways to capture these and bring these in. Now, what we found is there's a lot of systems out there that aren't creating native time series metrics, either at, again, the system performance level, the application performance level. Again, you wrote these applications potentially a long time ago. You're not necessarily going to go back and retool them to send native metrics to Sumo Logic. That'd be great if you want to, obviously. We can accept those streams in anything ranging from the graphite format to Carbon 2.0, including the new metadata space with the key value pairs to really describe that data in an optimal format for both storage and retrieval through the system. So again, we're not expecting everybody to be able to do that. Some of these applications, the people that wrote it aren't there. You're not going to go back and change something that's working great. All of this telemetry may already exist in your logs. So this is a constant request that we got from our customers is, this stuff's already in our logs. We're already even pulling these numbers out and making dashboards in Sumo Logic of them, but we really want to be able to retain this data for 13 months, for example, for customers that want to do trending over seasonality and specific buying periods, things like that, across their data sets to see, are things happening the same today as they were last year on this exact same day at this exact same time, or are things going off kilter here? So for the ability to do some of those things with the data without requiring you to store all of that data for an extremely extended period of time, which obviously we can support as well, our goal here is to give you that method to take that data from your logs, extract it in the same fashion that you can use field extraction rules today, as I'll show in a moment, to really pull these out, turn them into native time series metrics, store them within the Sumo Logic metrics platform, and give you the full value of that platform, even if you're not generating the metric natively. Again, if it's in the log, if it's telemetry we can pull from that data set, we can pull it out now and actually give you access to that.
Cool.
So next I'm going to step into a quick demonstration and show you how this actually looks within the system. We need to switch over to the laptop. There we go. Thank you. So we're going to start off in the Sumo Logic UI. So first I'm going to go through a little bit of a details to how we actually get this stuff out of your log data. So we're going to start by going to Manage Data and then Settings. And right up here at the top, you're going to see Logs to Metrics. So this is not a button that showed up in your account last week. This is a button that will be live, I believe, for everybody that's in the room today. So we've actually enabled this feature in effectively open beta for all the customers that are in attendance here at Illuminate. So anybody that goes into the UI today, if it's not there, come find Brian later. He'll make sure it gets turned on for your org, but everybody's should be on that's in this room right now. So what you're going to see when you get within this Logs to Metrics is a screen that looks very similar to the field extraction rule experience within Sumo Logic. Ultimately, you're given both a name, what are we going to call this rule, a scope, so which of my logs, either by source category, specific filter terms, or other words that we'd like to filter to make sure that we're only pulling this data from the appropriate data sets within the environment. You don't necessarily want to turn every log into a metric, as we'll describe in a few moments why. And then the parse expression. This is the same parsing engine that you use in the UI. You don't have to learn a new language here, change anything. It supports both anchor-based parsing as well as regular expression-based parsing. So again, anything you can search for from that parsing perspective within the UI, you can use to pull out the appropriate portion of these data sets from your telemetry logs to really get a good picture of what you're doing with that data. Now, as we scroll down here, it is going to give you a preview of that parse expression. So you're going to see what are the different things that we are pulling out, specifically as again, just raw fields at this point. The next step is defining the value of those different fields. Each field can be selected either as a metric or a dimension. So for those that are not super familiar with metrics at this point, the difference between the two is the metric is very simply the number. That is the actual time series that we're tracking within the environment. The dimension are going to be the key value pairs of all of the different metadata that you may track about this. The node ID, the cluster, the region, the organization ID. Again, whatever makes up your application that you would want to track these metrics by that facet, you're going to be able to do that by calling those pieces of the log line out as a dimension. Obviously, you can also hard code dimensions here as well. So using that same syntax above, you can create those hard-coded fields. Now, down here at the bottom, there's a little button to estimate DPM. So for those unfamiliar with DPM that may not be utilizing our metrics very heavily today, DPM is data points per minute. This is going to allow us to show you exactly how much data this is going to be extracting from your environment on an average minutely basis, at least from, I believe this is the last 15 minutes of log data that it's going to run this estimation. DPM is how we charge for metrics. That's the unit of measure when you're buying additional metrics within your account to enable it for your organizations to utilize. That, again, that's ultimately what you're going to be billed against. When you click that Estimate DPM button, it's going to show you how many different, in this case, what the time frame was, what the DPM was generated from that rule, in this case, about 140, as well as the number of unique time series if you're worried about cardinality within a specific data set. This will show you if you've created effectively too many different series that you may want to pare that down to really get valuable data out of that data set. Now, over here on the right, we're actually showing you the available and total DPM purchased within your account. So if you have questions about how many of these do we own, how many can we use today, what is my entitlement, those numbers are right here of both how many do you have free as well as how many you've purchased. So if there's any questions about that, obviously this will give you the number. And if you have questions about getting more of these or trying more of these, obviously you can work with your account team, and we're glad to help you get to the right place there. If this is something that you'd like to either play with to see if it makes sense for your organization, or immediately buy more of if you already know that it's the right thing. Now, there's another little option right here to count the number of log messages. So within this environment, not all metrics that you want to pull out of this data set are necessarily going to be in the log. Sometimes the metrics that you want to create from your logs are about the logs. What this will allow you to do is effectively create a counter based on that scope filter that you've already specified above to list out any of the individual data points and create a new data point for each occurrence of that log line happening. This could be a good way to count 404 messages or any response code from your application, specific error types or messages within your environment. The goal really being, again, to give you that solid metadata around the data set. The important note here is that for either of these options right now, it is going to create a single DPM per metric that you choose here for each line of text that you run through this scope. That could be a lot of DPM. This could very quickly blow through the ones that you have and make it where you need more, which is not our intent, to waste DPM on that data. So while we are releasing this feature in beta today, without this aggregate function, we are actually working on an aggregation function so that instead of storing each metric as a raw data line per item, we're going to give you the ability to aggregate those log lines and create minute roll-ups in every dimension, min, max, average, sum, and total, I believe. Brian, correct me if I missed any. Yep. So from that perspective, to get a higher level view of that data at a minutely basis without, again, blowing out your DPM usage. So that would be one data point per minute for all of those aspects for a very large set of data potentially. So again, that's what's coming next in this. That'll really give you the ability to do that, whether it's a metric that you are extracting with the rule or a metric about the data. Again, number of successful or failed logins, right? Simple things that you could just do a search for or parse for up here to say, is this a success or fail, and count those within my environment. Again, the use cases here are pretty endless. Ultimately, some of the data sets that this applies very well to are those really, really big blobs of data that are valuable, but tough to dig through because there's so much. Things like CDN logs, load balancer logs, application access logs that you might look at for errors right now, but you'd like to track some larger statistics, and ultimately they just take too long to either construct, pull back, or the data is not relevant by the time you're ultimately getting it back. So those are some of the things that we'd like to obviously solve and give you that retention as well as the other long-term query benefits there. So I'm actually going to show a quick example of that dashboard that Brian was going through earlier. So just to show you that's not something that we're making up, how much better metrics can return. We're going to look at that same data set that he had. This is actually looking at some back-end logs of converting some of the messages being processed from our logs to metrics filter in the back end today. We're going to take this, and right now I'm looking at the last 24 hours of data. I'm going to go ahead and have this look at the last 14 days of data. So it's going to go ahead and redraw that dashboard here. You can see that the metrics query already returned instantaneously. And in this case, it's actually still processing up here. While we've drawn out the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, it's still got to dig back through 9 days of data before that query on the log side is done running. Obviously, again, there's ways to minimize that delay with either live view dashboards or scheduled views. If there is things that you don't want to convert to metrics and you just want to make show up on your screen faster. We're not saying that you have to do this if you want dashboards to be quick. There's a lot of other ways to do that. Just based on any data set, if all you're looking for is these very simple time series metrics, the ability to have, again, that quick response time, as well as all the alerting features, storage features, and again, everything else that Brian went through earlier, this is a good way to solve that problem, as well as potentially freeing up as you start to move through this data. If all you wanted was those numbers out of that log data, you no longer necessarily need to keep that data for 30 days or a year in log form. So once you've done this logs to metrics, which goes into effect as of when you click that button, it's not retroactive on the data set. It will only start processing these just like a field extraction rule from the point that you click go. So keep that in mind. But once you start processing this data, if you are storing all the metrics you need here, you could lower the retention for those customers that are on our Cloud Flex model that have the variable retention enabled within their account. And you can adjust the retention of potentially that large bucket to free up space for other critical logs that you'd really like to hold on to longer within your environment.
Awesome. A few other things to point out. As we looked in the parse expression of that dialog, what you'll notice is you don't do any aggregations in that parse expression there. You're probably used to in the log world, you kind of time slice and then you pick your aggregations, you say count by time slice or average by time slice. You're going to send the raw data into our metrics engine, which actually does the aggregations on the fly for you. So this is really nice. You don't have to worry about, oh, do I want the sum or the count or the min or the max? Send the raw data in. When you go into metrics, we'll do those aggregations for you so that you could choose, okay, I just want to track the count of it, or I want to track the sum of it. So in this screen, you don't have to do the time slicing. You don't have to do the aggregations. Don't worry about figuring that out here. Just pipe that in as is. And then another point, we talked about cardinality. Cardinality is how unique this data set is in terms of number of time series. We'll give you a preview of how many unique time series this will produce. In this case, this is only 18 unique time series, so it's 2 metrics. Actually, we were doing, I think, 2 metrics per host ID, and we had 9 different hosts, so that's 18 metrics we're tracking. Key thing to keep in mind here is you don't want to do this over very high cardinality data sets. You don't want to do this if you're trying to track 1 million transactions every hour, like a very unique ID or a customer ID. Logs are going to be better for handling that high cardinality. We're going to be pretty good at handling tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 unique IDs. But if you're trying to track like a ephemeral ID that is generated every new transaction, metrics aren't going to be the way to do it right now. So we're going to warn you if we think that maybe you misconfigured one of your dimensions and you're including something that's growing infinitely. We'll say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be creating this rule. That's why we give you a little quick preview here to say, how many unique time series are you generating, as well as the DPM calculations let you know how much volume this will produce.
And just to clarify there, that'll only be cardinality for things that you've chosen as a dimension. So if you don't call out that process ID or transaction ID as a dimension within the data set, it's not going to increment that cardinality. Ultimately, it'll be combined and the aggregates will be of the other dimensions that are in place there.
Yeah, yep. So we could switch back to the presentation just to wrap up here. So again, this is enabled on your accounts today. If you don't see it, let me know. If you registered a little bit later, maybe we didn't catch your ID. Can we go back to the presentation, please? So this should be enabled on your account if you're interested in getting started today. Again, think about some of those logs where you want to accelerate those KPIs, whether it's a number that's embedded inside of your log or it's the presence of the log itself. You want to count the number of errors. Every log line's an error message. Or you want to count the number of transactions. You can start doing that today, no problem. And then, of course, on our dashboards, combine metrics and logs visualizations together, and then create those alerts, and you're good to go. So with that, we'd like to open it up to questions. Any questions? Yeah, we have a couple here.
Yeah, Rishi's
coming over
now.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic.
So on the screen where it says the available versus used DPMs, is that over a specific amount of time, or is that like our monthly ingestion rate?
Having a little trouble here. We couldn't get the monitor there.
Yeah, that speaker's not live, Rishi.
Yeah. So sorry. Say that a little bit louder.
So if we,
go.
where you show the available versus used DPMs, that's over the monthly aggregate. Is that how we would figure that out, to figure out, if I look at the DPMs in a 60-minute period and it's 160, how do I compare that against the average or the usage amount that's shown?
So the DPM is calculated, it's average per minute. So like in this example, I don't know if we have the screenshot here, but we'll run a query on the last 60 minutes and say, hey, on average, each minute you were seeing, say, 100 DPM. For billing purposes, we look at, over the course of the month, what was your average per minute. So we'll let you kind of go above let's say your limit's 5,000 DPM. You could kind of go above that for a little bit of time, maybe drop back down. We're going to look at, in aggregate, over that month, what was your average per minute. So in the preview screen, we're going to show you, hey, based on the last 60 minutes, it looked like 100 DPM, but you might get a spike of traffic tomorrow where it jumps to 500 DPM.
Right, and then how do we compare that against where it says available versus used DPMs on the lower right?
So in that case, it really is just looking at the last hourly average. It's not really intended to be the whole overall account. Ultimately, the data volume index is going to have the data that you're looking for as to what your average DPM is over time and help you dig into which sources are sending that data.
And then the other question is, can we go from views into metrics?
Not yet, but that's coming. Yeah, so the question is, can we pipe scheduled views straight into metrics? We're going to be building that. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here.
Can you talk about 13 months retention? How does Sumo Logic do that? Is it something that we need to specify, like the type of storage, maybe S3 bucket? And can we extend the log retention?
Sure. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
So we'll answer the question. It's really a two-part question. So first, around metrics specifically. The metrics data by default is all kept for that 13-month period at a roll-up form. So for the first 7 days,
That's right, yeah.
it is kept in whatever raw form you sent us that data. So if it was a bunch of things per second, we kept them all. Ultimately, as we work up that scale at the end of that week, those will disappear, and ultimately the 1-minute roll-ups will remain for the rest of that month. So for 30 days, they are kept at 1-minute resolution. And again, it's min, max, average, total, sum. So depending on what you're looking for within that data set, it may be a little different, but it'll give you that sense of that minute overall, including the max for the outliers and min for outliers on the low side. For everything for the next 12 months past that 30 days, everything is kept at 1-hour roll-up resolution. All those roll-ups are actually done at time of ingest. It's just how long we keep each of them. So we will have that 1-hour roll-up for 13 months. That's automatic for metrics data. There's no options or configuration settings to modify that. It's 13 months on immediately. Any metric that you send, that's what it'll be. On the log side, to the other side of your question, those customers that are within our CloudFlex licensing model today have the ability to specify a different retention period per partition or index within their data set. So any data that you route into either a separate partition for longer or shorter term retention, you'll have the option to adjust that up or down to make sure that you're keeping that set of data the right time. If you do not have that option under the partitions page, either you don't have manage indexes, in which case you may not actually be able to get to the page to look at them. The other option being that if you're not on CloudFlex yet, if you're still on our classic licensing model, that option won't yet be available. So you'll be seeing that highly likely being turned on with your next renewal or change to your contract, where you would be moving to the options to have that be available.
Thank you for answering that. Next question is, does Sumo Logic have mechanisms for catching false alerts smartly and avoid engineers from being paged?
So the question, do we have a way of catching false alerts smartly?
Right, because a lot of times, let's say we have Docker containers running in our system which are actually not down, but yet PagerDuty alert says that it's down. So if Sumo Logic is catching those alerts and it realizes that no, the containers aren't down, does it do that thing smartly?
So there's a few ways you can handle that. So our alerting engine does have a way for you to specify, back to the missing data threshold. Let me see if I could bring it up here. But if you do have metrics that are coming or going, or containers that are coming and going, you don't want to get alerted when something breaks. So in this returning alerting screen here, we have a threshold for missing data at the bottom. And what you could say is, if no data has been seen for the last 5 minutes, send me an alert. Now what we also have is a selector for you to say, if we're not seeing any data for any of the time series, send me an alert. And that's good in the case where you have a very specific set of nodes. Maybe this cluster has 20 nodes. If it goes to 19, send me an alert because that's bad. But in the case where you're running a whole service that has containers coming and going, you don't want to be alerted on that. And then there's an option here to say, if no data has been seen for all of the time series, meaning the entire service stopped, if all of my containers stopped, that's probably a bad thing. So it's one way where you could reduce the noise a little bit. And then I guess I'd say another thing is, as you're specifying these rolling window thresholds, you can specify that last 5 minutes, last 10 minutes. So you could say, based on the data that we've seen in the last 10 minutes, maybe it goes away for a little bit, maybe it comes back. We'll catch those in those rolling windows that you specify. But hopefully the missing data one's going to help reduce that noise a little bit, where the metrics disappear and you don't really care about any individual container. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Cool.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
guys.
Mike.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Just wanted to announce, please don't forget to complete your surveys. They're in the mobile app. So if you go to your Android Play Store or Apple Play Store, you can download the mobile app, Sumo Logic Events, and then feel free to complete the surveys and give us your feedback. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.